So to keep it really short so we don't spend all time hearing introductions. So if I start here, one sentence introduction each, and then we'll get into the questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rodrigo, and I'm leading the cybersecurity products at Nokia.
No way.
Well done.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Danielle Sievertson, and I help our largest telcos navigate the changing security landscape.
I just presented, so you should pay attention.
Diego Lopez from Telefónica. I'm leading a team that is dealing, among other things, with promising technologies, and in this case, is basically AI and the blood within the AI that is data.
So we've got a great panel with different types of companies that should give us different perspectives. And I'm hoping, as the moderator, they don't all agree, because that gets a bit tedious. So please try and disagree a bit when we go through this. So when we think about the landscape, when I think about security and when I think about threats, one of the things I did in a past life when I was a student is I looked at international security. And I looked at the trends in security. I studied it. What are the standard ways of thinking about threats? It's about capability multiplied by intent. And typically in international relations, the reason people think about that way is capability is something you can quantify. It's more concrete. But intent can change incredibly quickly, and therefore is very tricky. When we think about the security threat now in 2024, what is different compared with previous years? And I'm going to open that to the panel and see who wants to jump in on it. Because I think we've all been working in this industry a long time. But what's different now?
So maybe I can kick this off, first of all, by acknowledging that the telecommunications sector is not a sector like many other verticals. So we look into communication service providers as mission-critical networks. If they are attacked, basically the whole country gets crippled. If they are attacked, there are no payment possibilities. You cannot pay on the supermarket. The emergency lines go down. Several other impacts which really cripple the country. And the consequence is that then they become very attractive to be attacked by different types of attackers. This might be state-sponsored attacks. These might be high-profile attacker organizations which take advantage as well of the geopolitical situation to make out of this a good business, and they are quite attracted to the subscriber information they can catch, the information that they can basically sniff or steal, and finally taking those networks down. So I think that's a major threat for 2024, which wasn't there before.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, I agree with you. The geopolitical, I mean, we have two active conflicts. One's brewing, and the election season is right around the corner. And if the past is any indication of the future, we're going to absolutely see a rise in nation-state actors, and we've already been seeing that. I think in addition to that, as to your point about the network, specific to the telco industry, the convergence of 5G, industrial IoT, move to open hybrid cloud, and the disaggregated architectures has vastly expanded the attack surface for operators. And then thirdly, the cyber criminal activity is just accelerating at such an alarming speed and pace. I mean, you don't have to look further from the headlines to see the impact of ransomware, espionage, even using cyber as a weapon during war. So what's really, really clear is the ever-increasing sophistication in this anti-economy of cybercrime. And it's estimated to grow up till $8 trillion. I mean, there's a lot going on, and I think it's going to be a really challenging year for all.
I agree.
Who else wants to jump in? What's specifically different now, though? The time element rather than the industry element?
It's also the barrier to entry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the skills required perhaps 5 years ago were very different than the skills required today. And again, we're talking about artificial intelligence. I think AI is changing the requirement. I mean, we talked about Worm GPT and some tools that are available. If I want to build a career around becoming a hacker, which I hope nobody in this audience does. But the barrier to entry versus 5 years ago is a lot less than what we had before.
I would say that everything that has happened with disaggregation on the one hand, and the integration of the cloud and network, et cetera, is at the end, we have the famous continuum. Not any longer you have IT on the one side, you have network on the other side, and this is not my problem because I'm a network guy. I don't care about an AI identifying a malware that can attack because I have a perfect hardware protected thing. What we have is a continuous software running in places that very often we don't fully control. And that's I believe that that's the real difference. We are expanding and spreading over territories that normally were not the ones in which we are used to deal with.
The attack surface is also...
Yeah, we're expanding it. It's much more flexible. We are more agile. But then you become a little bit more, which is the name, vulnerable.
So I think that attack surface is interesting, because you can think about that from the technology we have in our networks. You can also think about that as, with the move to 5G Advanced, cellular is now part of agriculture, automation, manufacturing, critical communications. It's going into different parts of the economy, automotive. So it's no longer just consumer and business, person-to-person communications. It's a core part of the economy, I would say. Next question. You've kind of partly answered this, but I'm going to throw it out again because I think it's an interesting one. So at MWC this year, AI is everywhere, right? But one of the things that's striking conceptually is that if we went back 10 years or so, I think there was an expectation you'd have intelligence in the core. And that was part of the 5G thinking. At this MWC, we've seen a new organization announced by NVIDIA and a bunch of other companies, Arm, SoftBank, about 10 companies, DeepSig. You'll see the announcement. And it's all about pulling together implementation work around AI in the RAN, not the core. So that's obviously a trend we've seen over previous years. It's now probably accelerating the idea of putting in more intelligence into the RAN. So I'm curious, though, when we think about how telecom is different to other industries in its use of AI, is it massively different? Is it similar? What does the panel think about that?
Well, if I may, I believe that in general, telecoms is different from other industries in the use of whatever-based technology, and you name it, databases, software, whatever the characteristics, because of two main reasons. One is that we have a need for radical openness that other industries don't have. We need to cooperate directly and immediately with our competitors, which is something that is, if you think about it, car manufacturers, they don't, just to give you an example, or I don't know, the tourism industry, they don't need to have that deep and immediate cooperation on the one hand. Second is something that when you think about the network, I call it the conservation principle. The way in which a network behaves is quite different from how another IT systems behave. Whatever enters a network has to go out, more or less. I'm not saying that, and that's a conservation principle. It's not that you send just a request to Netflix and you get 1 or 100 gigs of video. You put a packet inside the network and the packet has to come out elsewhere. And that's very important as well in the way you have to think about how you conceive the different systems that we have. This is something that we have to take into account when we go to the cloud, when we think about AI, and when we think about protecting the infrastructure itself.
Yeah, I think top of mind for all telcos is their network, right? You already touched upon it. It's so vital to their day-to-day operations. And what we're seeing in the early pilots, the Gen AI pilots around the network, is really focused on cost and productivity. So think network optimization, NOC automation. No other industry has the rich network data that telcos have on their customers. And never before has that been integrated into the business. So what we've been talking all week to operators is, how do you take Gen AI coupled with the right governance to enable telcos to unlock the value of that network data by combining it with customer and external data, applying NLP, prompt engineering, summarization to enhance customer care and personalized campaigns.
And I see even, look, our telco engineers compared to an engineer that works on a traditional vertical, on top of all the challenges that all the others have, and they also have, like normal attacks like DDoS, stealing subscriber data, and so on, they need to ensure the continuity of the telco network.
Yeah,
the service needs to continue. And for that, they need to understand telecommunication-specific protocols. They need to understand telecommunication-specific regulations, telecommunication-specific technologies, some of them decades old, others completely new, service-based architecture. And this is a very specialized combination, having all this knowledge on telecommunication networks, how they work, and security knowledge, being security experts at the same time. And that's why I think, or where I think that as well, improving the base LLM models with specialized training on telecommunication standards, on security standards, on regulations, but also with dynamic training, for example, on the topology of the network, on the incidents, on the usage information, can help significantly reducing the incident resolution time.
So I don't want to be controversial here, but I would say...
No, please do. Please be controversial.
But yeah, so yes, absolutely. I agree here in the sense that service provider is different in terms of industry and the requirements. But I would argue, we're only talking about operation resilience here, right? And operation resilience runs with manufacturing, with oil and gas, with other organizations that obviously also cater with customer data as well as operational data, and it's obviously that level of cybersecurity is required for either of them. I think what's really changed now in the service provider industry, I think as we just said, is this merger of IT and OT kind of coming together. And so the awareness towards moving from not just operational resilience, but cyber resilience is a lot greater than what we had in the past, right? It's been there in other industries, like financial services, I always argue, is probably the furthest ahead when it comes to cyber, but it's caught up at this point with service providers.
So moving on, I think we're agreed there is a threat. There's always a debate on how great the threat is, but can you just give some examples of security problems you've seen that have been enabled by AI to date? Some concrete examples, just because I think the audience likes concrete examples.
So I gave a few of these, but for me, it's the capability of using tools like that are available, like ChatGPT. So WormGPT is one example. There's MalwareGPT, FraudGPT. There's a bunch of them that are available in the dark web that attackers can use to enable themselves. It won't substitute the attacker, however, right? So we're not at that stage yet where we could say you can have an AI run a completely AI-only based attack against a particular organization. That hasn't happened yet. Right? And I keep using the word "yet" because obviously we could be close to that from happening as well. So I would say the key difference right now versus before is with the advent of generative AI, we've essentially enabled ourselves to become a lot faster as attackers as well.
But are there concrete examples we could cite of outages that may have been AI related, or big outages that in future could be made easier through AI tools?
Yeah.
I'll give one, sorry, just to add, I'll give one in the deepfake community, in the deepfake base, right? So we're seeing deepfake activity actually increase quite rapidly, and we've seen an example, not necessarily in service provider, but in financial services. About 3 weeks ago, we saw a deepfake attack against a bank, which lost $20 million because the deepfake was of a CFO approving a transaction to their teams.
Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead.
We are working on we're making some experiment on the two hypotheses that not that's something that has happened yet, but something that could happen in the short future. One is, as usual, is the how you can, the use of LLMs or something similar, not necessarily the current LLMs, to deduce configurations and identify configuration flaws. We are playing with this idea that some potential adversary either having access to the configurations, that it's not so difficult if you know the appropriate humans making an analysis, or being able to deduce some errors in the configurations that can be there because a human or even an automation error. The second is something that we have started to think is about the possibility of inducing something like a sort of an autoimmune response or autoimmune illness, which is the typical, is a little bit what happens when you, is what happens with this famous ping of death or whatever. You start a behavior on the network that can cause an overreaction of the security measurement, the other security automated mechanisms. And what you do is that you abused these closed loops that we are now starting to deploy by faking, not against an individual, because this is another things that have to do with your web of trust, etc., but trying to fake the already automated mechanisms that we are deploying.
Yeah, and I think we don't need to necessarily, or I have no doubts, I know that outages are happening. We don't necessarily need to link Gen AI directly to the outage because there are other factors involved. So we know, for example, that, as it was mentioned here, the barrier for the hackers is now lower. So hackers which are less skilled can now leverage Gen AI, for example, to understand attack vectors against the telco network, even without a deep understanding of the telco network. But also, as you mentioned before, like phishing, smishing, vishing attacks. While these are extremely traditional attacks, you know, Bill Gates Foundation is not offering $1 million anymore, right? They are now writing specialized emails, as you were mentioning, going to Facebook, LinkedIn, and writing very targeted attacks. And why is this impacting? What's the direct relationship on an outage? We know that most of the successful complex attacks on the network involve a compromised account of an employee. So if the phishing attack is very successful, and if they are able to impersonate the employee, then they are inside the network, and then we have a problem. And then outages happen.
So I think to summarize that, we've got Gen AI and other types of machine learning are increasing the capability, going back to my opening comment, that makes it easier for attackers. And then effectively, hybrid working, using Teams, using remote communication tools, increases the risk of phishing attacks where people are being impersonated through audio or video communications. I think that's what you're alluding to, essentially. And so the change to hybrid working has made some of these easier.
The ability for a large language model to go search, for example, all the information on Facebook. Just imagine an email, an automated large language model that will check Facebook, that will check LinkedIn, that will check Twitter or X, and write a personalized email to that person. The likelihood for that person to go and click the link is much higher. I think you provided some figures.
Yep. Or a tool like that could even be used to identify targets, maybe people who speak at conferences. It's a bit worrying. I'm on a VPN right now. So one of the other things that I think, when I look around the show floor, I'm seeing a lot of is people using Gen AI to mean just AI or machine learning. They're not making the distinction between descriptive AI and Gen AI. And I'm curious what the panel thinks about the differences, both from an attack and a defense point of view, of those two flavors of machine learning. Is there color there we can help with? Put it out to the panel.
Sorry, how do you define it? What's your definition of descriptive AI versus Gen AI?
I think Gen AI is more the creation of large language models or image tools or video tools. That's how I would think about generative AI.
I think they complement each other. So I would say that descriptive AI, in my perspective, is basically learning what is normal, identifying the outliers. We used to call it machine learning, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So we have been using this to identify the outliers, for example, useful for
categorizing
what's a normal what's a normal activity, for example, for a specific engineer,
Yep.
and then we can identify an outlier. This engineer is not usually accessing this network element or working on the weekend. This is a problem. That's how I see descriptive AI or machine learning,
Yep.
which can be now augmented by the large language models, bringing context, bringing some reasoning, and, for example, correlating the fact that this engineer did this specific attack, for example, with the other consequences on the network. So traditionally, we would go and we know, okay, we got a malware on this machine. Let's clean it. Now you could go and actually check who has planted this malware. And this person, which other network elements could have been affected? Which other attacks could have been done? And that's where I think Gen AI or LLMs can complement machine learning.
It's quite fun. We have an attack and defense here. Normally the moderator asks the questions, not the panelists ask the moderator questions. But I'm going to ask a question with an example. So one of the examples I saw from before the current height wave was a telecom operator that was using machine learning to analyze photos of street cabinets, to analyze whether the wiring config and the organization of components was correct, which the idea was the engineer would take a photo and you could analyze that and spot standard problems, patterns in things being miswired or whatever. I could imagine if you automated that now, you might even spot malicious intervention in the cabinet where someone's maliciously moved a wire to the wrong place. But that's an example of what I would call descriptive AI.
I totally agree. And that's why I asked your definition, because definitions for people in this room perhaps may be different as well in terms of descriptive versus machine learning. So for us, machine learning is nothing new, right? It's been around for almost 2 decades at this point. The question is really, how can you use machine learning and generative AI to essentially get better at your job or get better at doing detection response? So on the one side, machine learning helps, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, around you could say the effectiveness of cyber, right? And generative AI helps with the efficiency of how you deal with cyber incidents.
That was the next question is, one of the issues I think that will happen or could happen is companies could be complacent. They could go, we've got rules-based techniques already in place, we've got various security products deployed, they're mostly rules-based, we don't need machine learning or AI-based tools to defend. And my question to the panel is, if an organization does that, what is likely to happen? What is the risk they're taking?
Yeah, I think the traditional approach for cybersecurity before AI was mainly reactive, right? And relied heavily on manual analysis, signature detection based detective systems, and rules-based systems, which were largely ineffective against new and unknown threats. And today's cyber criminals are using advanced AI and just continually being more and more sophisticated. So organizations absolutely need to, and the time is now to modernize their security posture by leveraging AI and automation technologies to keep the bad actors at bay.
And that's an important thing, this combination of these generative models that, I mean, not generative models only to build deepfakes in images, but generative models that can mimic the behavior of network components. It's something that can allow us to play with situations that we cannot play with in reality. I mean, it's a typical situation where you have, you want to run zero-day exploits, and you have it in a controlled environment. Right now, what we do, or normally what I understand people do, is to have it in a confined toy environment. With generative AI, what you can have is a much more realistic and not so toy environment, and you can gain an advantage on this. But you have for sure to have into account that the adversaries may have this as well. So you have to keep the race, and this is something that you cannot sit down and rest and say, no, I'm done, and this is something you have to keep running and trying to stay ahead of them, because if you have a hammer, they're going to have a hammer. And that's something that for sure is going to happen.
And they don't need to follow the process or go for CapEx approval or OpEx approval.
And as usual, they only need to be successful once, and you need to be successful 1 billion times. That's,
Yeah.
I don't know if if it's even possible to have a security environment today without some level of machine learning.
Yeah.
I think pretty much the majority, I'm not just speaking for Palo Alto, I'm speaking, of course, on behalf of the cybersecurity community. I think we've all developed some form of machine learning inside of whatever tools we have. Because if you think about the job of a CISO today, we're not just focused on endpoints and the network and the data center. We're thinking about cloud, GRC, SOC, so many different domains of cybersecurity that a CISO looks after. I mean, I have to believe if you're a good CISO, which I hope everybody is in this room, you're looking at vendors, that have some level of machine learning already embedded in their systems, so you can do your job and the effectiveness of those attacks can be actually prevented, right? That's the other thing I just want to add. And yeah, as you said, generative AI, of course, it's going to help us do our job a little bit better, but it's really machine learning, I think, is
That's an interesting point that you made about the different vendors and the offers. Is that something that is important as well, is that you have a sound set of data sets that allow you to validate and evaluate the different proposals that you have at hand. Because at the end, you will always end having several proposals, and the problem is that right now, with all these soft tools, everything is so soft that it's very difficult to have a clear test suite. You say, no, well, I'm going to go through these 100 tests, get a score, and see what. Right now, it's more about, well, let's see, I have these 1,000 data sets mimicking this different 1,000 combination of different attacks. Let's see what happens. And that's very important in my view.
So I think, obviously, the panel is an AI panel, so everyone believes in using AI and machine learning tools for defense, obviously. So we're going to agree on that, I think, probably looking across the panel, but which I think is correct. But when we think about those tools, we may have tools that are more automated. We may have tools like LLMs being used to provide expert advice to people that they can then analyze trends, spot trends, and then act on them. And all the network vendors, I think, have got LLM models being trained on telecom data to help with that side of things too. So that is a kind of generative AI type thing to kind of democratize the flow of data through the organization. But one thing we've seen in other areas is kind of malicious injection into the model, into the input into the model. It might be in the original training, it might be in the inference. I mean, one of the examples that's often shown is in visual analysis, using symbols to make the machine learning tool believe there's a dog in the image when actually there isn't, type things. Crafted input that a human would not pick up on, but is designed to mislead the model. How do we make sure that our defensive AI and machine learning tools don't have malicious input going into them? Ask the panel.
Yeah, so at IBM, it's critical to ensure that we're securing the entire AI pipeline. So one of the things that we just recently announced was our security framework for AI, and I think it's a great way to kind of think about what you were asking, Ian, which is you have to think about how you need to secure the data, how you secure the model, and then how do you secure the usage of that, right? So you have those three components, and then underlying it, where are those models being built and run? They're being built and run in your infrastructure, so you have to secure that. And then lastly, and most importantly, is establishing an AI governance that consistently monitors for fairness, drift, and bias. But even more important is, we're kind of in the nascent phases of Gen AI, right? We're doing a lot of pilots, a lot of POCs, and a lot of MVPs, and not quite kind of kicked off the production piece. But as we move into production, it is so critically important that we develop a robust governance practice, as well as adhere to the principles of ethical AI.
I fully agree that it's very important, the CI/CD pipeline for basically training corpus that we use to augment the base models to avoid these problems of biases or wrong information. I think prompt injection is also a problem, and this is more even related to even our employees that could, fall into the temptation of using available LLM models on the market, and they will just not realize that maybe while they're writing the question, that specific service might be injecting additional information that will influence the reply that will come out. And we have seen this even on the base models, right? Like it's now fixed on ChatGPT-4, but we have seen like this famous question, which are the tools to break or to cut a stop sign, and ChatGPT telling, I won't reply you, and then you ask it in 64, Unicode 64, and then it will answer. So, and that was fixed meanwhile, but that's a kind of a good example on how these models still need to mature and need really a lot of red teaming and testing to ensure that they stay within the boundaries.
So there's a process and a governance piece in how we manage the use of these tools. Is there a technical approach that we should be looking at doing to protect against malicious injection of?
We are trying to go at the root level, a very simple approach. That is something that we started to call about assuring about the data provenance. So you can trace back who sent the data, and we're trying to do so not, because you can sign a big data set and you have it signed, and that's simple, but what we're trying to do is to find mechanisms for applying signature mechanisms at the data unit level, so you can identify that. We are working with, we are working with this in the ITF, trying to identify at the within the young models that are being used for monitoring the different network elements to be able to incorporate a concise signature that allows you to trace back where are you going. The results are, we are still experimenting with it, but are quite promising. And I know, it's not we are not solving the whole problem, but we are trying to go to the data atoms, if you like, to remain reasonably assured that they have not been altered, or that we can trace back the duration.
I think there's really three areas here, right? So on the one side, as Danielle just said, it's really around, yes, the governance aspect, right? So understand your risks, understand the supply chain of AI as well, right? So who are you reliant on, where are you bringing that in? And then to your point around building the right guardrails, I think is really critical as well. So as you build an AI policy within your organization, what is allowed, what is not allowed throughout that CI/CD pipeline is critical. And then in terms of technology, I think you really do need to use machine learning and AI to counter those types of threats. But I feel like we're not there yet completely, outside of a few certain examples, like the Security Operations Center. Yes, we have tools that can get faster at detecting and responding, absolutely, and we use AI for that. At Palo Alto, we do that. But generally, across the service provider domain, that hasn't happened yet.
Are you almost suggesting that you could use machine learning to spot malicious injection?
Right.
Is that what you're almost suggesting there?
Yeah.
You could
I think just going back to the technology piece is we have to protect AI just in the same way we've done in the past, right? So I think about it in kind of three pillars, which is threat detection and response, data security, and identity and access management. So as we're evolving and leveraging machine learning and Gen AI in those areas of our business, I think that'll serve us well as we continue down this AI journey.
So I'm going to have a look at the audience. Does anyone have a question from the audience they'd like to throw at us? I've got bright lights on me, but I can just about see. Anyone like to pose the panel a question from the audience in the room? Anyone? Okay, I'll keep going. I'll ask again in a few minutes. So one of the things that's happened a lot this year and last year at the MWC has been the Open Gateway Initiative around offering APIs and exposing parts of the network. What does that mean for machine learning and AI-related threats and what you've got to defend against?
Well, we are spreading over, opening up. It's is another vector of potential attacks, and can be used. Can be used can be used by external AIs or can be used to somehow pollute or alter the behavior of internal AIs that are used, for example, for the typical translation of intents as they are expressed by the users. If you somehow pollute the model, it's something that the effects could be quite interesting to see. So, but that's life. I mean, we are moving ahead, and we need to provide additional services, and then implies additional risks. And
Look, I don't think the model makes a difference. I think it's the data set that you have, right? So as long as you have a strong data set that you're leveraging, frankly, the model, you know, and whether it's open or whether it's something you've developed yourself, I don't think it makes a difference.
I think there are no doubts that it helps for the good as well. So we see lots of our engineers sometimes using this kind of technology to speed up their activities, to speed up the coding, for example. But unfortunately, the bad guys do it as well. So they can leverage this to write scripts, to write code that will enable them to do bad things to our network.
You're thinking using LLMs to improve coding, speed of
For example,
action.
yeah, so this OpenAI with GitHub and so on will speed up the development of good software, but will also speed up the development of malicious software, which is, of course, a concern.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also just from a telco perspective, right, opening up or exposing the network APIs just expands our attack surface, right, in the telecom industry. And so I think it's really important for organizations to adopt the standard open API specification framework, right, as they're thinking through the security requirements and considerations.
Okay, I'll go back to the room. Oh, hang on, you want to come
Just a comment connected with this. Take into account that those open APIs are going to be required to work across competing operators as well. So that as well is another, you know, is another turn in this in the problem of the networking industry that is somehow different from the.
Because that you have to commute, you have to.
Because what happens there is an attack that is successful on an open API in Telefonica, it's going to be successful in an open API in Vodafone or whatever else, and that's not the same that happens in the other industries. So we have to think ahead of that as well. Or
for example, if a tool were to take down one of the MNOs in a country, I think you were mentioning Vodafone Portugal, if one of the operators goes down, that may put more load on the other operators.
Exactly.
So you might get a collateral bit of damage happening.
The impact is much higher.
I'll ask the audience again. We got I think a question at the front I can see. Have we got microphones or not?
Hey.
Yeah, we have. Good. Just there. And then there'll be one at the back, I think, on the left as well in a second.
Hi, everyone. I was listening to the different topics that you raised, but thinking about it, for example, are you thinking about a kind of fail-safe? I mean, now that we are starting to all connected, in case that, for example, there is a threat, start to spread for different networks, I think that it should be design a kind of protocol to stop and not falling down the whole network. For example, because I was thinking that now all the networks are starting to interconnect. So I don't know if you are thinking about this kind of situation or.
There is a group in ETSI that is called SAI, that is about securing AI, that has been considering this kind of. Well, fail-safes is circuit breakers, that you can interrupt the flow of data or the flow of control coming or going to the AI or coming to the AI in ways that avoid this kind of massive disruption. Yes, people are thinking about that. I would not say that we have the solution, but we are thinking about that.
I think it needs to be driven by the regulators to a certain extent as well, right? To enforce some form of a fail-safe, to your question, to essentially have everyone put some sort of fail-safe. I don't think that's happened yet.
I mean, I think there's almost two things here. There's the automation where you've got it feeding directly into the network, where you maybe need the fail-safe, but when I've spoken to people, particularly in the last week, a lot of people said, well, we're going to have this, but it's going to be sort of self-contained and informing who then act on it. So that's another way of limiting the knock-on effects. There was a question at the back, I think.
Very interesting panel. I heard 3 words: mission-critical data. You said increased attack surface, and then you also said rich customer insights. And we work extensively in the healthcare domain. Have you ever explored federated learning and things around that, where the data doesn't move, but the weights are something which are learned and centralized? Because that, again, like one of the things which I was hearing yesterday, that the attackers have no qualms about sharing any of this, but the good guys get stuck in the legal and the legalities around sharing sensitive data. So just a question around that, and if that's a centralized effort.
Yeah, we have to be very careful in sharing sensitive data, of course, right, because of regulations. But when it comes to sharing IOCs, or indicators of compromise, and metadata, that is something that we do. So we established about, I think, maybe 7 years ago, something called the Cyber Threat Alliance, where we worked very closely with the top leading, cybersecurity companies around the world. And we essentially, to your point, had that conversation. The CEOs of those companies sat down and said, look, the bad guys are sharing data all the time. Why don't the good guys? And so we established this amongst the 3 or 4 leading cybersecurity companies at the time. And today, I think that's grown to more than 27, 28 organizations, including service providers like Telefonica, that are part of that initiative. So we are sharing at that point. Again, to my point earlier around, the data is what's really critical, right? So if you have the right subset and you have the uniqueness of data, I think that's ultimately what's going to stop the attackers, not the model itself.
Yeah, I can agree with that. We also augment the models with threat intelligence that we learn from our customer base, although we are extremely careful, for example, on training the models with specific customer data. We don't do that because there is always a trade-off between sharing across our customer base and exposing the privacy of our customers, which we certainly don't want to do.
Of course. Yeah.
Other questions in the room? There's one here. If we've got time, there's one at the back. Go for it. Go here, on the front here. Go.
Okay, so this is Nauman Khan. My question is more conceptually that the technology is available. I mean, few years ago it was available to us and to the threat actors, and most of the part was manual for attacking, and defending was also manual. Now we have moved to AI. So good guys has AI, bad guys has AI. So again, we are maybe at the same balance. So do you see one side getting an edge, or it would stay the same? Because if it would stay the same, the technology will keep on improving. It will keep the balance as it is.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think we're going to give both sides a run for our money, basically, right? So from an attacker's point of view, it's as a service, right? It's basically an industry now where if you want to have the biggest impact, you sell the bad code, the malicious code, all that stuff. But then on the other side, you have all of us and all of the organization and the strength behind us fighting them day in and day out and getting smarter, especially with the use of Gen AI and machine learning.
I'd actually, we're going to have to park off this one, but I would say it's not good enough for us to stay in the current balance. Because if we stay in the current balance with the number of security threats that are hitting, more and more industries are relying on these networks. So we can't afford the current level of problems because they will impact more and more people and more parts of the economy. We have to improve the defense, not be in balance. And I think when you think about what the operators are planning to do around network slicing, offering assured quality of service and having SLAs around that, that means you've got to have higher bar on the defense to keep this stuff working. When you're supporting agriculture, industry, smart grids, you need a higher bar of defense. We have to get better. Balance isn't good enough.
Yeah,
and I think that's a good place to end on.
That's part of the fun, isn't it?
Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone attending.